I am recording this conversation. So you can see everybody, you can see Rose, you can see Kapatalitana, you can see Amy, Empress, Charisma, and so forth and so on. Okay, Danica, Genesee, Boykin.
Yes.
Charisma, McNeil. Okay, so welcome everybody. And the new server, have you been able to resolve your Blackboard issues?
Yeah, I emailed Mr. Norden, I guess, today, and he said wait till tomorrow. And I know that one of the assignments are due today. Is it possible if I'll submit it tomorrow?
Yes, I will reopen it once you get in, okay?
Oh,
Wait.
okay, okay. Thank you so much, Professor.
You're going to reopen it, and when do we have to submit it by?
Well, once I reopen it, you have 2 days.
How much?
You have 2 days once I reopen it, yes. Okay. If it's an assignment, if it's a discussion, you probably just miss it because a discussion is a discussion. Okay. Everybody has to be able to participate in your discussion and what you say. And so once it's closed, we're not going to tell everybody to come back and hear what you say. But then it's one discussion, so it's not going to really impact you as such.
Just to be clear, how many discussions are we up to?
You've only done one discussion. One was due today. I'm going to leave it up until tomorrow, or even till Friday for you. So we shouldn't worry about that. Just only one discussion, and if you miss it, that's not going to be a big deal. All right? Okay. So this class is about the war on drugs. Okay. When you hear about the war on drugs, this is an attempt. The war on drugs is about the efforts of the United States government and worldwide to discourage the distribution and consumption of addictive drugs, and in particular, psychoactive drugs. Okay. This particular class, we focus on 2 kinds of psychoactive drugs, cocaine and opium. Okay. And I just tried to limit it because we cannot really go too broadly talking about the war on drugs. And so why does the government feel that there should be a war on drugs? For the simple reason that especially these psychoactive drugs really do a lot of harm and a lot of damage to people. And so when you talk about drugs that we're talking about mostly drugs that are addictive. When you define drugs, how do you define drugs? Okay, define drugs would include alcohol, that's a drug. You include marijuana, that's a drug. You include cocaine, that's a drug. You include opium, which people take. But you also include, say, amphetamines, which are actually chemical components and other kinds of addictive drugs that people take to get high. Okay. Now, and you asked me, why is it that some things are allowed and some things are not allowed, some things are prohibited, but every kind of addictive drug is, in a way, controlled by the U.S. government. For example, alcohol and tobacco are allowed, they are addictive, but you realize that tobacco is not psychoactive. If you smoke regular tobacco, you will not, get drunk. You will not get dizzy. You will not, what do you call it? Behave differently. But in fact, people that smoke tobacco, if they don't smoke it, they could get nervous because it's a stimulant. tobacco is a stimulant. That's what it is. Okay. Alcohol is also a stimulant, but it is psychoactive in the sense that it affects the brain and also makes people behave differently. But the point of the matter is that if you take alcohol in reasonable quantities, you can say in moderate quantities or in moderation, you can just take it and go about the business. Okay, it's a kind of a stimulant. Stimulant in the sense that it may act on your brain, act on your nerves, but you enjoy it in a different way, and maybe just enjoy the taste. Okay, and that would be about it. It will not even make you feel tipsy. And when I differentiate being tipsy from being drunk. Okay, you can drink alcohol without being tipsy about it, and you just like go about the business, enjoy the taste and the flavor. That's about it. And it will not do you any long-term harm if you again take it in moderation. It will not do any long-term damage to you. But take something like tobacco. There's no such thing as moderate tobacco that does not affect your lungs. Nevertheless, some people smoke tobacco and they live to be 99, they live to be 100. Judge Burns, the actor, is a good example. I mean, he just enjoyed his cigars, and big ones too. You take Golda Meir of Israel, who was the prime minister of Israel, and she smoked cigarettes so much that people said that the only time she was not smoking a cigarette was when she was sleeping, because she has a cigarette by her dinner table, and when she's eating, she takes one spoon of food and she takes one puff of her cigarette. So nevertheless, cigarette is not psychoactive. But you think about something like cocaine. Cocaine is psychoactive. You think about something like opium. Opium is psychoactive. Okay. Opium comes out of the poppy, and the way it's harvested, people scratch on the poppy bulb, and then it comes up with some kind of secretion, a gooey secretion, which eventually is processed. I don't know how, and people process it. They can smoke it, they can sniff it, they can drink it, and it's a stimulant. And makes people fall asleep. The biological name for opium is Papaver somniferum. Somniferum, which comes actually means sleep maker. Okay, somniferum, sleep maker. Somni comes from the Latin word sleep, which is somnus somnare, somnari. And then ferum comes from the Latin word to make. Okay. And of course, ferum is the what do you call it? The tense to have, to make something. Okay. So now, we're going to focus on those two drugs, and something like opium has been used from the ancient world all the way back to Egypt, where it was used in different forms. It was used in religious ceremonies. It was used as medication. Today we still use extracts of opium to make anesthesia. Okay, so the anesthesia that some of the anesthesia, then it's the only thing, they use others. Of course, science has given us alternatives, but morphine, which you may have heard about, is made out of opium. So that's a legitimate cultivation of it, controlled. Okay. Cocaine is made out of coca leaf, and early forms of what do you call it, codeine, is made out of cocaine. Okay, and has been used in drinks, and as a painkiller. Okay, and ancient Incas used the coca leaf, they chew on it. It numbs their cheeks, numbs their stomachs, and they can walk for very long periods of time. And so in this class, we're going to look at policies designed to combat the, I would say, improper use of these drugs. And some people have opinions that they want drugs, it's no good, it's used to attack Black people, but you know, that's a perspective. Our purpose in this class is not for us to criticize the war on drugs or to support it. No, my purpose for this class is to give you information, which will include public policy information, which would include economic policies and economic analysis and economic history. And so, again, there's going to be a historical part of it. How have the war on drugs developed? The war on drugs, is this something that only has occurred in the United States? The answer is no. So you're going to see that practically many countries that have been affected by these drugs, either cocaine or opium, have fought against it. And what are the reasons? Again, I'm not going to support or oppose or criticize any particular policy, but just to give you the information so that you can see the trend of events. So this is what we're going to learn in this class. And before I continue, let me say two things. One, active participation is essential, okay? Participate in the discussions. Please do participate in the discussions. It's absolutely essential, okay? You have to do all the work. This is going to be a fast-paced class, okay? It is not going to be like a regular semester. This class is going to be done in 5 weeks. And in 5 weeks, you're going to do the equivalent of 14 weeks of work, which is practically 3 weeks of work every week, because this is summer school, okay? This is McGiver's College summer school. And so you're going to really be challenged. This is going to be a challenging class, but you're out of it. You are not going to be the first to do this class. This is the second section of this class for this summer. There was the first session that lasted 5 weeks. This class is also taught in winter and in 3 weeks. Like other classes that are taught in winter in the 3-week period. So, yeah, somebody asked if I forgot. No, I didn't forget. I just got caught up in something and see how I rushed it. All right, so please participate in the discussions and also do your homework assignments. This is going to be intense. And so now that we have talked about basically how we're going to run this class, basically what this class is about, I want to emphasize right now for our purposes the next set of topics we're going to talk about, which is how do we approach this? How do we explain the war on drugs? How do we explain, attitudes about the war on drugs? Okay, there are three main. I will say, if you're in the second module, let's say perspectives. Ideological perspectives on the war on drugs. Okay. So what are these perspectives? Let me just check on something for you so that I will talk according to what you're going to see. Right. So, in your textbook that you're reading, it's called analytical perspectives. Okay. but I call them ideological perspectives. And very importantly, again, before I proceed, and the reason I want to talk about these analytical perspectives, which I call ideological perspectives, is that very often students do not read the materials. When a question is asked, they just rush into the internet and come up with stories that have nothing to do with the question. So I want to explain very clearly what we mean by analytical perspectives. There are three perspectives that are discussed in your book. I'll talk about two of them, and then I'll add a different one that is very clear in its description. Okay, one is the deviance approach. Okay, and the other is the rational approach. And then I'm going to talk about the historical materialism perspective. Okay, now, now there are approaches to fighting the war on drugs. Okay, there are approaches to fighting the war on drugs. There's a supply side, there's a demand side. Okay, but even then, besides the supply side and the demand side, there's also the harm reduction approach, which we will talk about as we're going, and other approaches that are different. So within the demand side and the supply side approach, the demand side attempts to discourage demand. Okay, and then the supply side attempts to discourage supply. Now, the different ideological approaches, different ideological perspectives also influence the way we approach the supply side and the way we approach the demand side. Okay, so we are looking at a complex nested approach, okay, to analysis. Okay, as the demand side attempts to discourage demand, and the supply side attempts to discourage supply. But how do you approach attempts to discourage supply? The way you approach the attempts to discourage supply also depends on your perspective ideologically. Depends on whether you are a deviance ideologist, or you are a rational ideologist, or you take the approach of historical materialism. And so I'm going to give you an example of the supply side approach. The approach is by the United States government
You're not clear.
We can't hear you.
I'm not clear?
No, but we cannot hear you.
So you didn't hear any of the things I was saying?
Just now.
No,
Just,
Are you hearing me better now?
yes,
yes.
sir.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to be a little closer to the mic. Okay. See, I'm thinking that I'm in the classrooms where my voice is echoing across the room. Okay. Now, like I said, there's a supply side, which is an attempt to discourage supply, and there's a demand side, which is an attempt to discourage demand. And I was trying to say that whether you are looking at the supply side or the demand side, there are three ideological approaches or three analytical perspectives for each side. Okay. There is the deviance perspective, the deviance analytical perspective. There is the rationale, okay, which is the liberal perspective. Okay. The deviance approach is what we'll call the conservative approach. Okay. Those who have a conservative ideology. And so they take the deviance approach. Sometimes it's also referred to as the realistic philosophical approach. Okay, it's a philosophical approach called realism, and I'm going to describe all of this. You know, the realistic philosophy of power relationships. Okay, and so both realism and the conservatism and the deviance approach, all of them are essentially are based on a conservative ideology. Okay, and you can also see internal contradictions in these in the conservative ideology or in the rational approach. Historical materialism actually is a critical approach. Okay, so historical materialism, which is based on Marxism, it's not that they don't agree with the other two approaches, and so we're going to talk about how essentially they attack the other two approaches, and their objective is an explanation. And that explanation leads to a solution, an ultimate solution that they are proposing. And so we're going to talk about it. So let me, first of all, illustrate or exemplify the supply side. Okay, the United States government, for example, intervenes with the governments of those countries that supply the drugs, cocaine, and opium. They approach them to prevent the flow of the drugs. The United States government monitors its boundaries, its borders, its territorial borders, to make sure that those who bring in drugs do not come in. Okay, so they don't bring the drugs at all. They confiscate drugs at airport. They approach governments and tell them to discourage the cultivation of these crops. They provide them the military capability to fight those who produce and distribute the drugs. They actually take unilateral action sometimes with airplanes, and they go and spray the fields of the countries that produce the drugs, or the farms and what have you, or they try to provide assistance for alternative crops. These are all attempts in supply side approach. Okay, all right. Now, in the demand side approach would include educating people that drugs are not good for you. Okay, that's one way to discourage demand. Drugs are not good for you. Or if you are caught distributing drugs, if you are caught with drugs in your hands, you go to jail. And then by going to jail for either distribution or for even having it, then what happens? You are discouraged from going and getting the drugs. And also the other way is to treat people who are addicted to these drugs and try to rehabilitate them and say, well, see what it has done to you, so you should stop it. And you can also address some of the reasons why people do drugs, okay? And address them. It could be frustration, okay? That make people go and take drugs as a solution to their problems. And so you try to discourage people from using drugs. So that's the demand side approach. So I describe the supply side and describe the demand side. Okay. Now, what are the analytical perspectives? Okay, the analytical perspectives. Let's talk about the deviance, which I say is the conservative approach. Okay. Now, the deviance approach, let me use very simple language. It's kind of like identifies people's behavior and explain that behavior, okay, and put it in a taxonomy. So the deviance perspective simply says that those who use drugs, who are they? Who are they? Deviance means that people deviate, or people who behave in a way that is contrary to the accepted norms, to the established norms of a society. Now, when people use drugs, these people are people who are deviant in their behavior. What's a deviant? A deviant is somebody, in every society, there are norms of behavior, there are standards of behavior. And when people use drugs, what do? They may misbehave, they become distracted, they don't go to work, all kinds of things. Okay, and so what happens then is that those who have a defense perspective, put a label on drug users and say they are bad people, or they are people who are deviating from the established norms of a community. Now, if you have this deviance perspective of drug users, how do you approach the supply side? Of course, if you see somebody that uses drugs, then you can put them in jail. Somebody that supplies drugs, put them in jail. You go to South America and use military force to try to destroy the crops. American government will overthrow governments because they are not enforcing, the war on drugs. That is a deviant approach. These are deviant governments also, and those who engage in the distribution are deviants also. So that's a perspective. Somebody's asking if there's a required textbook for this course. The answer is yes. It's in the syllabus. Okay, and I think I provided the first 2 chapters for free, but you have to get the other one, the book itself. It's not costly. On Amazon, you can get it everywhere from $6 to $30, depending on how soon you get there and what is left. Okay, so that is the required textbook for the course. All right, now, if you have the rational approach, how would you approach the supply side? The rational people will say, well, people engage in the cultivation of drugs because it's profitable, or because they have nothing else to do. And therefore, you can discourage them from cultivation of drugs because by providing them other opportunities, by providing them resources to cultivate other crops, and also create a demand for those crops so that they can export those crops, or they can sell them in their own countries. And so you provide them alternatives and educate them about not cultivating drugs and get them to believe that this is wrong, you are doing harm to people by selling these drugs to them. So, and the idea in rationality is that people do things according to their interest. The person who is cultivating drugs is cultivating it because they need money, and they don't have to use them. But if I can cultivate this crop and sell it, I will make a living. Somebody comes to you and say, but this is a better crop. It will yield you more money than what you're doing. So a rational thinker will take and cultivate the crop that gives them more money. Now, what is rational? Rationality is behavior that is consistent with the desired outcome. Okay, and I'll give you an example, a cold-hearted example that I have very often used. There was sometime in the news, somebody jumped from the 7th floor of a house in the Bronx and jumped headfirst and died. And so the news people came and was asking, this is your neighbor. What do you know, about him that made him jump? Said, I don't know, but what he did is not rational. And I said to people, no, what he did was rational. It was absolutely rational. For the simple reason that this guy is frustrated. He couldn't find a way out of whatever frustration. And for him, he wanted to die. He wanted to be dead. Because dying is a perfect solution to all our problems, believe you me. I've never seen a dead person who is complaining that they're dead. To begin with, when somebody's dead, they don't feel anything. If you've been under anesthesia, you know what it feels to be dead, I have a family member who once said, who had never been under anesthesia. And so they went under anesthesia and they cut them up and, chopped them up and sewed them up, and they came out, feeling well. I said, why? They cut up my skin and everything, and I didn't even feel anything. Well, if that is the way death feels good. So somebody who jumps head first, who wanted to die, did a rational. Okay? Suppose they shot themselves with a gun in their hand. That is not rational. You shoot yourself in the hand, you will not die. Likely, you are not going to die. All right? Okay. So the idea of the rational theory, the rational concept, which is the liberal concept, is that people do things according to their interests, according to what will lead them to achieve their objective. And here, somebody who is frustrated and simply wants to not deal with the frustration will smoke cocaine, will smoke opium, and they fall asleep. Okay? But what is irrational about it is that you wake up to the same problem. And you keep doing it. But the rationality in it is that, of course, each time you do it, you forget it for a while. At least it helps you to not get frustrated, for a couple of hours, or maybe even days, and you just keep doing it. That's a way to, not deal with your problems. Okay, so drugs is a problem in the community. When people smoke drugs, they get drunk, they create violence in their families, they don't go to work, they miss work. And what happens? It affects the society, because when people are violent in the families, you have unstable families, you have violence, you have divorce. But besides that, you also have the issue that the rest of society suffers because of the strain on medical facilities, which raises medical costs and which will raise insurance costs for everybody, which also, it might also affect, it does affect productivity of output, because when people don't go to work, then what they will produce is lost to the community. And so these are issues that rationalize or justify the war on drugs. And so when people take drugs because they have problems they want to solve, they are being rational in a way that they are doing things that will help them to forget their problem for now. Okay, and so those who distribute drugs are distributing drugs because rationally they're doing it because it's a way to make a living. Okay, just give me a minute, 1 minute. Sorry, I have to step out for a minute. Okay, so now there's then the third analytical perspective, the third ideological perspective is the materialistic, historical materialism, which comes out of Marxism. Okay, Marxism being a set of ideas about society and about history by Karl Marx, the ideologist, the historian, the economist, you can call him whatever, which simply says that in every society and throughout history, throughout the history of mankind, you have two classes of people, two groups of people, the exploiters and the exploited. Okay, the ruling classes are exploiters, and the exploited are the working masses of people. The ruling classes exploit the masses. And so what the effect on the masses of people, the laboring classes, the working class, is that they feel alienated from the system. And they feel alienated because whatever they produce is being appropriated by the exploiting class. And so the exploiting class, the capitalist class, you know, they are rich and they eat very well, while the exploited class get the crumbs and they don't eat well and they don't have the same set of facilities, and their output is appropriated away from their hands. And so they live in poverty. And then, of course, have a middle class that is a buffer between the exploited class, between the ruling class, and the rest of the laboring classes. And so you have the very, very poor class, and the middle class, but all of them are working class. And so the alienation from the production process and the distribution process is what causes people to use drugs. And so that alienation, in a way, the way to resolve that feeling of alienation and really being cheated out of what you produce is the use of drugs. That is the explanation for it. And what is the solution? Let's forget about trying to provide the farmers with alternative crops. Let's forget about trying to use force to compel people to not use drugs or to compel people to not cultivate drugs. Let the working class overthrow the capitalist class. That is their proposition. Once the working class overthrows the exploiting capitalist class, all of these problems will be solved. That is their proposition. Now, like I said, I am not here to support, promote any particular ideology. I'm just here to give you the information. And so I've just described what Marxism and historical materialism proposes. You know? And what does historical materialism mean? I mean, as a philosophy, historical materialism proposes that from the beginning of the human race and throughout history, there has been a struggle between the exploited class and the exploited class. And very often this struggle, which has been continuous, has led always and inevitably to some kind of what you call compromise along the way. That is some kind of a mixture of the two, and then the struggle continues. And that is what they call historical dialectics, okay, in Marxist theory. Historical dialectics means that somehow you get a synthesis. A synthesis meaning that, and I'll give you an example of a synthesis. Even being in America, or even in European history or in the history of mankind, if you think about the fact that the African Americans were brought into America as slaves and they were exploited abusively as such. Now, the struggle, took place, as we all know. What did you get? What you got was sharecropping, which is actually a compromise between the chattel slavery of the earlier era and complete freedom for Black people. But they were still being exploited in sharecropping. And so the civil rights struggle essentially began following sharecropping. And of course, you can see eventually Black people were able to vote, which, okay, people were still struggling against. And then not only from being able to vote, then you had the civil rights movement. And you can see that in as much as Black people were allowed to vote, people were still putting obstacles against them. So that was the dialectical outcome at that point. You're allowed to go and vote, but you can see the KKK and what have you continue to intimidate people and people couldn't vote. Until then, we had the Civil Rights Act of 1965. You still had the Jim Crow laws that prevented, had different facilities for Black people and white people, and different schools and different, you name it, which in 1965, during the Civil Rights era of the 1960s, then you had the Civil Rights Acts and all of that. When after all, the abolishing of slavery and giving everybody freedom to be an American should have ended everything. But what happened was that change took place on the margin. There was never complete change, okay? And we're still struggling against it today. And so this is essentially what Karl Marx described as historical materialism, or the dialectic materialism over time. So So the ultimate solution, according to historical materialists, is that the system has to be overthrown. The working class must overthrow the exploiting class, the capitalist class. And once that is done, all these other issues will take care of themselves. It's like what you say in the Bible, get ye for us the heavenly kingdom, and everything else shall be added unto it. And so according to the Marxists, historical materialists, the heavenly kingdom here is to overthrow the capitalist class. And once you do that, all these other propositions will take care of themselves. Okay, so essentially, that is what we have for the first week, because this is where we have stopped. And so this foundation that we have laid today will essentially be the foundation against which we are going to discuss the rest of the topics in the class. And each time we address any topic, I'm going to go back and try to describe what we see in the context, not only of the analytical perspectives, but also in the context of the demand approach and the supply approach, okay? So that you can see this in context, because, you know, I see quite often that when you bring up this question, students don't go and read the material and they think they can just wing the answers from the internet. That is not true, because this is an academic class, okay? And so you need to be able to describe theory and concepts and ideology so that you can see things in broader perspectives. And if you study ideology, which this class really will help you to understand, you can really contribute much more better to debates in the community. So in the 5 minutes that we have left, does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. So
Yes.
the book, yeah, because I wasn't sure that we had to get the book, but the book is The Drug Wars and Coffee House, the Political Economy. That's the
Yes.
book?
Yes, that's the book.
Okay.
It's an
And I
Amazon.
also, all right, good. So, all right, I'll get that book tonight. And the project that you have, can you explain that for us, please? The project that we have to do?
Fantastic, fantastic. The project, the final project for this class, is what is called an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography. Pick a very narrow topic. Do not pick a topic that says war on drugs in Europe. That is not going to happen. That's not going to be acceptable. Okay. Don't pick a topic like that. As we go, you will see we're going to get into details. So pick a topic out of the detail. One example would be, say, the drug laws, the drug warlords in, say, Latin America, like Pablo Escobar. Okay? You can compare the methods of Pablo Escobar with some other drug law. Okay? Now, in order to make such a comparison, you have to read a total of 7 articles, 7 of them. Okay? Read a total of 7 articles, summarize each article in 1 page. Summarize each of the 7 articles in 1 page. And before you do the summary, you have to bibliographically cite that article and then summarize it. Okay? Now, after doing the 7 summaries, then you should write an integrative summary about 2 pages long that will give me a picture of what you talked about, of what those 7 articles are talking about. It is not sufficient to say article number 1 says this, article number 2 says this, article number 3 says that. For example, if you compare the Cali cartel, South America, and the Medellin cartel, and their methods, and you say then the Medellin cartel hires people from the prisons and the Calicatel hires, you would say, vagrants from the streets. Nevertheless, whether they're hiring people from the prisons or they're hiring vagrants from the streets, they still do violence, but there are two different methods. And the two groups of people have the same characteristic. They are frustrated people, the people who have nothing to do, or people who have criminal minds. There's a difference in the methodology of recruitment. For example, if people go to the prisons and somebody who is sentenced to death, you say, you know what, you're going to die anyway. Why don't I try to get you out of here? And you go there. If you make it running drugs, you're alive and you enjoy it. If you don't make it and you get killed in the process, in any event, you're going to die anyway. You get the idea? Or you go to somebody, the vagrants on the streets, and say, you can eat here. One of these days, somebody's going to kill you. Maybe, maybe not. But here's a sure source of income. If you can help me run the drugs, you're going to make money. And you may well, if you have the smarts, you can survive it. But you're going to be living well rather than being on the street. And so if you can decipher these two differences in the methodology and describe it in a summary, that's your paper. And then, of course, after you write the integrative summary, which is going to be the first thing I want to see, and then I see all the 7 articles and their summaries, at the end, I need a final bibliographical listing, which says these are the 7 articles I read. Is that clear?
Yeah, so what, that's like a total of how many pages? I just want to make this clear too.
Okay, I mean, you're looking at least seven pages of the summaries, looking at 2 to 3 pages of integrative summary, which gives you 9 or 10, and then 1 page that gives you the listing at the end, which I'm looking at the maximum 11, 12 pages.
Okay, and when is it due? When is the due date?
It's on the syllabus.
Okay.
I
When
think it's
is it?
August 17th, but it's on the syllabus.
August what?
It should be August 17th because it's on the syllabus, but it's on the syllabus.
The class is over.
Yes, and I said, if you have, we are now in a question and answer session, and somebody asked a question.
Professor, I thought you said 7 page in the syllabus.
Well, the 7 summaries will give you the 7 pages. But you have to write an integrative summary, which is going to be 2 or 3 pages. And then the final bibliographical listing, which is on a separate page by itself.
So the final paper is supposed to be 12 pages, that what you're saying?
Yeah, between 11 and 12. I mean, you could write a longer integrative summary. You could make your integrative summary 4 pages if you want. I wouldn't have any issue with that. But try not to make it much more than 2 to 3 pages at the most.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Where can we get some of these articles from?
Well, no, get regular academic articles. You can get them from the internet. You can get them from a library. I mean, libraries are no longer easily open, but you can get articles from the internet.
Okay, thank you.
And those articles from the internet can also be summaries of articles that are in academic journals. or in magazines.
Can you provide us with some of the articles?
We're not providing with any of the articles. It's for you. This is for you now to go and do your own research. And this is your objective is for you to learn how to do research and find out information. But I provided an example in the project folder. So if you look at that example, you'll be able to see what kinds of articles we are talking about.
You will be posting this recording on Blackboard, right?
Posting what?
The recording of the class right now.
Oh,
On
absolutely.
Blackboard?
Since I'm recording it, I will post it. I'll provide you a link.
Okay, so I guess that's basically it. So it's basically annotated bibliography, like 7 of those, and then to summarize each one. Okay,
Yes.
okay. Okay, well, have a good night. I'm out.
All right. Any other questions?
Good night. Professor, you said the discussion was due tonight or tomorrow? Or?
Discussion, the first one was due on Tuesday. There's a discussion due tonight. And I'm going to actually post another thing that is going to be due on Saturday. But just for the benefit of everybody, remember, if you don't participate, you can get dropped. So you have to do something as soon as possible. There's a discussion due tonight. I can postpone it to tomorrow, but it will not stop the discussion due on Saturday. I will not extend that.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I was
Okay,
about to
thank you.
ask if you can postpone it till tomorrow. I just got home.
Okay, all right, I will.
Professor,
Thank
so
you.
the paper is like a term paper or no?
Yeah, it's not a time paper in the way you understand it. This is why I said it's an annotated bibliography, and I provided an example with just 2 articles.
Professor, can you repeat you said something about being dropped.
If you don't participate in anything, then the register is going to drop you by Monday.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good night, Professor.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Okay, good
Thank
night,
you,
Professor.
Professor. Good night.
I'll see you next week.